Her suspicion swelled into a precise threat. She could name an invasion of the boundary she'd built around her memories. That first confrontation set the tone for the morning that followed. Elena had left the porch lamp on and woken to find a small wrapped shell on the doormat, a neat linen bow tied around it. She picked up the shell with 2 fingers and felt the cool ridges under her thumb. The gift should have been meaningless, a neighborly gesture. Instead, it tightened the knot of unease in her chest. She crossed to the hedge and saw faint footprints in the damp sand beyond her property line. Her attention tracked the footprints like an accusation. Elena lived alone in the house she and her husband had renovated, and the details of that life mattered to her. She tended the garden with careful hands. She kept his chair at the table even when she ate by herself. Those facts showed up as concrete acts during the week: placing a kettle on the stove, pushing open the garden gate, setting a towel over the back of a chair. The man at the hedge shifted the meaning of those actions. Now each small routine might be watched, annotated, logged. She found Alexander Vale at his gate when she demanded an explanation. He was tall in a camel coat, each movement measured. Alexander looked at her without surprise. "Elena," he said, as if the name was the reason he stood where he did. Elena's suspicion snapped into anger. "What are you doing outside my house at night?" she asked. Her words had an edge. She could hear the shards in them. Alexander's mouth tightened. "He didn't mean to alarm you," he replied. "He was checking the boundary. There was damage to your fence." Elena had found one reason and an immediate answer. Her suspicion tilted into confusion. Thomas the gardener arrived then, hauling a rake and carrying a damp bundle of trimmed hedgerow. He looked between Elena and Alexander like a referee who'd been given no rulebook. "Morning, Elena, Thomas," and his tone carried workday normalcy that did not fit the tensione. "Saw footsteps this side and fixed what I could." Someone had broken the fence overnight. Elena turned the shell in her hands while Thomas spoke. When she showed him the wrapped gift, he frowned and said, "I didn't leave." That the presence of another person who noticed details pushed Elena's confusion toward alarm. Mara, the estate manager, arrived by 11 with a stack of papers and a measured look. She placed the acquisition notice on the kitchen table where Elena could not miss it. "Your neighbor's property sold last week," Mara stated. Her voice was precise and practical, the kind that carried thin relief and thin warning in one package. Elena read the buyer's name and felt her jaw tighten. The house next door belonged to someone who could buy whole streets. The background fact crystallized into a new concrete threat: a motivated buyer who had access to resources and privacy. Elena's suspicion hardened into a focused fear. The day offered small intrusions that each demanded a reaction. A repaired fence section showed new screws and a neat splice of wood. A tray of tea sat on her stoop at dawn, steam-cooled but the cup still warm to the touch. When Elena marched to the hedge and raised her voice across the low division, Alexander watched her with that same steady face. "You left the tea," he said. "Hands full. Didi thought you might like it." Elena, his name 3 times while Thomas watched from the driveway. "Alexander, don't touch my things. Don't leave me things." "What right do you have?" she asked. Her tone was sharp. The argument came in quick lines. "Elena," Alexander answered. "He saw the broken section and had it repaired. I left the tea because you looked tired that night." Elena's shoulders tightened. She wanted him to be blunt, to say he had no excuse. Instead, he offered small, careful kindnesses that made her more wary. The emotional shift moved from alarm to irritation. She recognized the pattern of closeness master's help. Elena's actions followed her doubt. She photographed the repaired fence, tucked the shell into a kitchen drawer, and called Mara for records. At the mailbox that afternoon, a child named Lucy from down the lane approached with an envelope pinched between 2 small fingers. "This dropped in our hallway, Lucy." Handing the photograph over. "It was in our mailbox, Miss Elena." Elena opened the envelope and found an old black and white photograph of her and someone she once knew, their arms slung around a weathered car. The photo had a date scrawled on the back and a small coffee stain on the corner. She felt her stomach hollow at the sight. The photograph held a past scene, her husband laughing on a summer day that she had not shared with anyone. Its sudden appearance changed her fear into a sharper alarm. Someone had dug through memory to find an image that should have been private. Elena marched straight from the mailbox to Alexander's gate. She found him moving a box of soil by the side patio, his gloves dusted. "How did you get that picture?" She demanded. "Who gave you permission to look through my things?" Her voice rose. Alexander straightened and wiped his hands on his coat. "He didn't take it. He said it was left on your stoop." "I saw it and kept my distance." Elena paced a step closer, palms pressed to the wooden lattice. Thomas lingered at the far end of the driveway, pretending indifference. "You stood at the hedge last night." Elena, naming the behavior that had been gathering into a pattern. Alexander's mouth formed a line. He did not deny it. The exchange quickened. Elena's speech broke into short questions. "Did you follow me to the store? Did you ask about my hours? Did you speak to my friends?" Alexander answered in even phrases. "No to the store, no to your friends. I watch from my property. I have reasons I cannot tell you yet." Elena heard the slow reveal in his voice and felt the emotion shift again from anger to a raw sense of betrayal. He had broken the line between observation and obsession without explanation. She pressed him with sharp lines. "Then tell me now. Elena, tell me what this is about. If you want to protect me, say so. If you want anything else, say that too." Alexander's thumb brushed the signet ring as he considered his words. He spoke slowly. "Thought I could help without telling you. I misjudged that. I am sorry for the fear I caused." The apology landed like a small lever. It altered the angle of the argument without undoing the evidence. Elena felt exposed. She made a choice. She would not let him off with a vague apology. She demanded specifics, a line he would cross. That evening, Elena found her back door padlock had been tampered with. The metal showed fine scratches where someone had tested the latch. She called Mara and explained the new detail. Mara arrived within an hour and sat at the kitchen table while Elena spread the evidence. "This is more than a gift or a fix." Mara, tapping the scratched metal with one fingertip. "This looks like someone was trying the lock." Her voice contained a decision. She would file a report. Elena's distrust swelled into concrete action. She would document. She would secure. She would no longer accept the explanation that kindness covered intrusion. In the middle of late afternoon, Elena let herself do something she avoided. She went through a box of papers in the attic and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to her husband. She opened it to a page where he had scrawled a list of names and a phrase about a debt owed by a man named Vale. The line was literal, a scribbled note that connected Alexander Vale to a past obligation. Elena's confusion turned into a sudden twist of understanding. The photograph, the repairs, the watchfulness, they were not random. They were tied to someone who once had ties to her husband. The discovery shifted her feelings from betrayal to a sharp, practical curiosity. Why had he returned now? A week of small intrusions followed. Alexander left folded notes on the gate with times she had forgotten, like the date he thought she should attend a neighbor meeting. He placed a spare pair of gloves on her porch the morning it rained. Each act moved between assistance and control. Elena began to catalogue them. She kept receipts, photographs, and a log she wrote in the margins of a notebook. In the evenings, she paced the kitchen and read the journal entry again. She compared handwriting and dates. The more she checked, the more she found small connections, an old invoice with Vale's company name, a gardener's receipt signed by an unfamiliar hand. These facts stacked into a clearer picture. One late afternoon near dusk, Elena could not contain herself. She crossed the narrow garden path and stopped outside Alexander's study window. The light inside was low. She pressed her palm to the glass. Inside, Alexander sat at a desk, papers arranged in precise stacks. He did not look up. Mara appeared behind her in the shadow of the hedge and whispered, "Don't go in there alone." Elena turned and nodded. She stepped back and then walked up the path to the side gate with her keys ready. She unlocked the side door and found the study empty. The room smelled faintly of cedar and bergamot. A floor lamp threw a warm pool of light across a wall. Elena opened the study door and walked inside. She would only look for proof. The first thing she saw was a neatly pinned map of the neighborhood with notes in a small, exact script. She moved her hands along the edge of the desk and touched a stack of photographs. Her breath caught. There on the wall, like a small, obsessive shrine, someone had tacked dozens of images, pictures of her leaving the house, photos of the repaired fence. A print of the black and white photograph she had received in the mailbox. Each image had notes taped beneath it, dates, times, small, clinical observations. Elena's anger returned like a physical shove. She turned in the room, searching for the explanation that could undo what she now understood as method and scale. Alexander appeared in the doorway as if he had not been there a moment before. He did not raise his voice. "Elena," he said, and the name felt like a summons. The confrontation that followed moved fast and loud. Elena spoke 3 sharp lines in succession. "Way, are you following me? Why did you take my mail? Why did you make a wall out of my life?" Alexander answered with equal brevity. "Didn't steal your mail. I collected things I feared you'd lose. I kept what you left behind so you wouldn't have to search for it." Elena's chest tightened. The words did not fit the wall of images. She stepped toward him, then stopped. Her fingers clutched the edge of a photograph. "Alexander's confession landed in Passisi was close to your husband years ago. He said there was a debt. He promised me something and never delivered. When he died, I thought the promise might be part of what you kept here. I wanted to understand what you had and why." Elena's reaction changed again, from anger to disbelief. "You built this," she said. Motioning to the wall, "So you watched me to collect evidence." Alexander swallowed and touched his ringy watch to keep time. "I thought I was protecting you from outside threats. I did not protect you from me." The sentences were short and raw. They created a rapid back and forth between accusation and attempt at explanation. The argument escalated into rapid exchange. "Elena, did you ever ask me?" Alexander answered, "I wanted to tell you when I could find the right time." Elena shot back, "You crossed my line." Alexander answered, "I know. I am sorry." "Elena, who gave you the right?" Alexander curled around the signet ringy thought. "I was repaying something owed," he said. The dialogue hit like a string of quick, pointed strikes. Thomas arrived then, breathless on the porch, having heard shouting. Mara followed with a phone in her hand. Their presence turned the private confrontation into a public one. Elena felt the attention as a pressure that sharpened her choices. In the study, Elena found a new item pinned beneath a photograph. A torn receipt with a name that matched her husband's handwriting and a date that placed him in a hospital room the week before he died. The receipt mentioned a transfer to a trust in Vale's name. The twist changed the frame entirely. Elena's anger stuttered into a different question. Had her husband been involved with Alexander in ways she had not known? The discovery forced her to widen the problem beyond boundary violations. It demanded investigation into motives built on past transactions. Her suspicion turned toward the unknown facts of her husband's final month. After a long argument, Alexander did something Elena had not expected. He sat down on the study floor and unfolded his hand. "See, kept your photograph wall, because I feared someone else would use your memory against you. He said he thought if I watched, I could intervene. I was wrong. I breached your trust instead." Elena felt a mixture of relief and renewed betrayal. She stepped closer and, without a word, tore down one of the notes. The motion was deliberate. Her hands trembled. She did not let tears fall. She gathered 2 photographs, one of her husband at the beach, one of a small office folder stamped with a date she did not recognize, and placed them on the desk. Mara made a decision in that moment. She reached for her phone and said, "Elena, I'm calling this in. We document this now, locking, filing, The works. Alina nodded. Thomas offered to stand at the gate and wait. The external events stacked, an official report, a solicitor's name, the image of her life turned into evidence. The emotional shift moved Alina from reactive fear to active planning. She was no longer merely defending the perimeter. She was turning intrusion into a case she could pursue. Alexander followed her to the threshold when she left the study. He did not reach for her. He did not ask forgiveness again. Instead, he offered one conditional line. I will stop crossing your lines if you ask me to. I will keep distance if that is what you want. Alina looked at him for a long moment. She felt the weight of choice and the study's evidence heavy on her shoulders. She made a specific decision in a single action. She closed the study door and slid the deadbolt across the wood. The sound of the bolt clicking home was a simple, decisive moment. Night arrived with the ocean's distant surf as a steady pulse. Alina sat at the kitchen table and spread the photograph and the torn receipt before her. She called Mara and read the details aloud while Mara typed notes and Thomas stood by the back gate. Lucy left a small note under Alina's door that said, "If you need me, I can water the plants." Alina pinned the note to the fridge with a magnet and felt gratitude flicker. The day had moved through suspicion, alarm, and betrayal into a plan to protect and to learn. There was no neat resolution. There was instead an action taken. Alina's final act in the chapter was small and concrete. She locked the mailbox and set a camera's battery on the counter, a practical step she could control. The evening closed on a concrete beat. Alina heard the gate click across the lane and the faint sound of footsteps retreating. She did not look up. She pressed the camera's power button and watched the tiny red light blink alive. The conditional promise Alexander had offered remained unverified. Mara's report would be filed in the morning. Alina set the photograph beside the journal page she had found. She slid her finger over the coffee stain and then snapped the journal shut. The last sound in the room was the camera's soft whir as it calibrated. Alina left the photograph on the table and stood to draw the drapes closed, sealing the house against the night and against whatever choices Alexander would make next. Now the rose on the mat made the silence into an accusation. She did not sit with the flower. Alina picked it up, fingers dusted with soil, and walked down the steps toward the gardener who was loading tools into the back of his truck. Louis looked up, palms already rough from work. "Louis," she said, and kept the word short. "Did you put this on my porch?" Louis wiped his hands on his knees and shook his head. "No, Alina." "I would have knocked." He spoke with the careful cadence of someone who had lived in the neighborhood long enough to watch, who owned which gate I closed up at 10 last night. "You saw me lock the shed." Alina pressed the rose tighter to her chest. Her suspicion shifted into irritation. "Then who was in my yard?" "Louis." She used his name in the question, like a lever. "Someone was here after dark." The gardener's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the fence line as if expecting a shadow. "Louis met her. Starry found this pot by the hedge this morning. I thought it was from a neighbor. I did not open your house." "Alina," he set the last box down and touched the truck's tailgate. "Didn't touch anything inside." Maya's voice arrived at the edge of the driveway before she did. "Alina, you call the police." Maya held a travel mug in one hand, hair in a messy knot, a work shirt already salted with coffee. Behind Maya, Ben from the CAF waved from his van and asked, "Everything okay?" The neighborhood filled the space with practical concern. Elena felt anger flare, then narrow into determination. "Not yet." "Elena, Louis, show me the shed." She stepped off the porch and moved toward the backyard gate. Her hands kept the rose as if it were evidence. Inside the shed, the lock hung from a nail and Louis shifted a stack of clay pots. He produced an envelope from under a tarp and handed it to Alina like a small, guilty animal. She cut the seal with her thumbnail and pulled out a receipt from a hotel on the Strand, room service charges, and a time stamp, 2:30 in the morning. Alina read the numbers twice. Her irritation cooled into something colder, a calculation. Why would someone leave a receipt? Maya crouched beside the boxes, eyes scanning the timber. That's pointless. Alina kept the paper between her fingers and counted the ways it could matter. The receipt proved someone had been near her house after midnight. The seashell and rose suggested deliberate attention. Her suspicion moved into alarm. Lewis, did you see anyone else near the back gate last night? Lewis shook his head and then, with a small, guilty sound, added, I heard a car slow down on Pelican at 1:02 in the morning. I thought it was delivery. I didn't look that evening. Over coffee at the cafe, the neighborhood gossip gathered itself into facts. Ben wiped down a table and said, I saw a man across the street this morning, well-dressed, watching. He left when I looked up. Alina turned the receipt in her hand, watched me. What did he look like? Maya sipped and said, tall, dark coat. He was alone. Kept his hands in his pockets. Ben added, he had a ring. Real subtle. But you could see it when he moved. The mention of a ring landed like a lead weight inside Alina's chest. She had not expected possessions to matter, but the ring suggested a certain class of watchfulness, a deliberate, prepared observation. Her suspicion altered again into a sharper curiosity. She imagined someone making notes, someone with reasons beyond neighborhood concern. Across the street, Alina caught a flash of dark tailored cloth and steel blue eyes framed by the crush of the cafe window. He turned away when she blinked. There! She said there was someone just now. Ben set the mug down and looked. Maya spread her hand. She left. Alina finished her coffee in a single bite of silence and went outside. She walked the block slowly, watching doorways and parked cars. When she came back to her porch, the rose still sat where she'd left it. Afternoon found Alina pushing Lewis harder. She made him open the envelope again and describe every mark on the receipt. The hotel's name is on the bottom, Luzjun House. You remember the charity auction there months ago? Elena's grip on the paper tightened. If someone had left a Dune House receipt by her shed, the move was not random. It felt like a breadcrumb with a face. Alina thought of the photograph she kept in the kitchen drawer, a picture of her with her late husband at the charity auction, his arm around her waist, their heads tilted together in a laugh. She went to the drawer and took the photograph out, fingers brushing the printed date. Her hands trembled only slightly. She did not tell Lewis about the photograph. She kept the tremor as a private measurement. Dusk altered the angle of everything. Elena found the back gate unlatched and a man on a low step stool leaning over new screws in the hinge. He wore a camel overcoat, slim gloves, and moved with slow, exact gestures. When the man turned and she saw the faint diagonal scar at his left eyebrow, her mouth dried. Who are you? Elena called, stepping into the yard. Her voice was flat with accusation. He straightened carefully and rested his thumb against a ring on his hand, a small, private habit. Alexander Vale, he said. The name cut clean across the grassy, bought the house next door. He spoke without hurry. Am fixing your gate. Elena's anger Floredio fixed my gate without asking. She his name again like a challenge. You don't get to do that. Who gave you permission? Alexander's hands did not move. No one gave me permission. I did it because the latch was loose and the wind had been catching it. I wanted to make sure it didn't open at night, so you deputize yourself for my safety. Alina took a step closer, the porch light making the edge of his jaw bright. Alexander, answering me is not the same as asking me. He inhaled slowly. Elena, I didn't mean to overstep. I keep my distance. I bought the property to be close without intruding. He paused, and the air held a brittle silent sigh. Will not come onto your land again, without asking. Elena stared at the scar along his eyebrow, at the way he smoothed the edge of his coat. He looked like the kind of man who kept lists. Her suspicion shifted into a thorn of distrust. Why close enough to hide and watch? She asked, why buy a house if you don't plan to be neighborly? He looked at her differently then, a careful softness in the low baritone of his voice. I promised your husband something. Alexanderi did not tell you because the promise was private. I thought distance would honor that promise. The admission landed like a small bomb. Elena's anger ran into confusion. What promise? And then, before he could answer, added, "Who is Alexander Vale to my husband?" Her words were short and sharp. Each syllable sought a hinge. He did not give the whole answer. I can tell you truthfully, I wanted you to be safe." Then he stepped back. Folding an invisible boundary between Themi will keep my distance if you ask me to. She left him at the gate and closed her kitchen door with the photograph still in her hand. Later that night she called Maya and Ben and asked them to help search the shed. They came with flashlights and the kind of practical curiosity that became a tool. Ben, "Well, find something if there is something to find." Maya put a hand on Elena's shoulder and said, "We stand with you." Elena, the shed smelled of oil and old wood. Maya pushed aside a stack of gardening catalogues and scraped her fingers along a wooden crate. "Here," she said, "look under a loose floorboard." They found a folded photograph wrapped in oilcloth. Elena opened it with a small, careful motion. The photograph showed her late husband standing beside a man in a dark coat. The man had a faint diagonal scar along his eyebrow and steel blue eyes that looked past the camera. Elena recognized the setting immediately, the charity auction stage, the same printed backdrop as her own snapshot, and her mouth went dry. "Alexander." "Elena." Her voice lost its edge and turned to the raw question of someone who was trying to rearrange what she knew. Maya, nothing for a long second, and then, "Elena, he was with your husband at the Dune House benefit." Ben's flashlight hit the photograph, and the two prints cast the same bright strip across the paper. The photograph changed the meaning of the receipt. Where the receipt had been a noise, the photograph was an instruction. Elena's confusion snapped into a new, sharper suspicion. Alexander had a connection to her husband and had been present in their shared public moments. Her emotion shifted again from confusion into a slow, urgent demand for truth. She carried the photograph across the garden under a sky that still held the last light. Alexander's porch light was on. He sat on the low step, looking out at the ocean as if the waves could answer questions he wouldn't. Elena crossed the low hedge and stopped with her foot on the first rung of his stoop. Her pulse measured the gap between the houses. "Alexander," she said, "did you promise my husband something?" Her voice was steady, but inside, the demand trembled with loss and with the need to protect what remained of her home. He stood slowly and did not look away. "I promised him I would watch over you until you were ready to stop needing it." He said, "That is the truth I can give you now." Elena's face moved through a few acts: disbelief, incredulity, then a dry laugh that sounded like a strangled thing. "Watch over me? By leaving receipts and flowers at my door. What does that mean, Alexander?" She used his name with a weight that sought an answer. He pressed his thumb to the signet ring at his finger and said, "Your husband asked me to be near you. That night at the auction, he worried you would be alone after his treatments. He made me promise to be close in case you needed help." Elena's mouth opened and closed. The promise was concrete now, a human detail that reframed his presence as something other than voyeurism. But she could not accept the soft framing without the hard proof. "Keep the photograph hidden in my shed." She demanded, "Leave footprints that make me feel watched." Alexander's jaw set. He thought distance would be better. I thought small gestures would be less invasive. I thought I was honoring him. I did not consider how it would feel to you." Their argument rose in short waves. "Elena, you can't decide what's less invasive for me, Alexander," he answered. "I know that now." They traded quick lines. 3, 4, 5 You bought the house I promised him. What else did he ask? Only that you be safe. Safe how? From being alone at night. I wasn't the one who asked for my privacy to be taken. I did not take your privacy. I tried to keep you safe." The exchange tightened and then loosened, each line pulling a new truth forward. When Elena demanded the name of the concierge at Dune House who had signed the receipt, Alexander shifted and did not answer. Some things were private between him and me. I will not betray that privacy unless you force me to." The refusal landed like cold iron. Elena felt betrayal through the joints in her hands. She moved first then, not with a speech, but with a practical choice. She walked back across the hedge and toward her house, the photograph pressed inside her palm. She did not call the police that night. Instead, she made a concrete plan, a watch, a record of who came by. Neighbors asked to keep an eye. The choice was small, tactical, and hers. Morning brought gossip. Ben leaned over the CAF counter and said, "There was an anonymous complaint at City Hall about a company tied to Alexander Vale." "People are talking." Alina turned the photograph between her fingers and felt a new pressure. This was no longer only about her privacy. If the machine of his life had a public motor, it could pull consequences into her neighborhood. Her suspicion shifted into wary calculation. If his presence had business ripples, then the promise had reach only he might control. Maya looked at Alina and said, "You can tell people exactly what you want from him. You can demand transparency." Alina kept the photograph and thought about what transparency might require. She could force his hand and make him reveal the private promise in full. But that would be a betrayal of her husband's confidence if his husband had asked Alexander to keep some things private. The moral knot tightened. Alina decided instead on a different action. She walked the line of hedges in the afternoon and counted the light. She watched the gate close and then stood by her window and listened for a car. She set the photograph on the windowsill, where the morning would catch it. It felt like keeping a ledger rather than making a plea. That night, as the ocean threw its repeated white at the cliff face, Alina sat with the photograph and the rose. Maya stayed on the couch and read through messages from neighbors. Ben texted updates about talk in the CAF. Lewis stopped by with a new lock for the shed and said, "I can fit it properly tomorrow." Each secondary character had shifted the direction of the day. Lewis by producing the envelope, Maya by finding the hidden photograph, Ben by bringing the neighborhood's voice. Their choices had moved the plot outward. Alina slept poorly but did not leave her porch light on. She left a note folded into the back of the photograph that read, "I am watching, not asking. If you come into my yard again, speak to me first." The note was not dramatic. It was a demand tied to an action. She left it on the windowsill and locked the door. The next morning, a complaint about Alexander's company arrived at the CAF in a small, printed notice. Ben slid it across the counter and said, "It's not your fight, Alina, but it's in the paper." Alina folded the photograph and slid it back into the drawer. She had moved from suspicion to a guarded posture, watchful, protective, unwilling to give control back. Her decisions were concrete and procedural. She would not be passively observed. She would document and respond. A week later, Alexander knocked at her front gate at dawn. He did not come into the yard. He stood on his side of the property line, hands empty, coat buttoned. "Alina," he said, he heard about the complaint. "I did not want you to be dragged in." Alina opened the gate and kept it between them like a ledger. "You never answered the question. What exactly did you promise my husband?" Her voice held the steady rhythm of someone who had determined the terms. He looked at the gate, then at her hands. "I promised him I would be there if he couldn't be. And I promised not to make that promise public. I meant to honor both. I am sorry for the way it felt." Alina made a choice in that moment that was not a declaration but a motion. She closed the gate for him, and in the simple click of metal she made her decision visible. She then keep the promise you made to me now. If you must act, ask me first. If you keep your distance, I will not ask you to leave." He nodded, the movement small and precise. "I will ask you first, Alina. I will not surprise you again." She did not agree to trust him fully. She did not forgive the secretive moments or the footsteps in the night. But she had reclaimed agency through a concrete action, closing the gate and setting rules. The night settled with a different residue, not comfort, exactly, but a workable boundary. Alina placed the photograph on the windowsill, potted the rose on the kitchen counter, and locked the shed herself. The world outside kept turning with gossip and city filings, But inside the house, she had made a practical decision. She would watch, she would record, and she would decide each time whether to step forward or to stay behind the gate. The chapter ended with her closing the gate and the sound of metal on metal, a clear final noise. It was not an ending of peace. It was a deliberate, concrete beat. She had taken control of the next move. Emotion route, suspicion, emotion shifts, suspicion, irritation, alarm. Alarm, curiosity, demand. Demand, confusion, guarded calculation. Guarded calculation, a resolve to watch. Elena closed the study door on the sound of her own footstep. She did not sit. She checked the foyer bolt, the kitchen back window, and then the porch light. The memory of the screen door fling from weeks ago pulsed in the back of her head, how she had yanked it open and found a dark shape at the hedge. She had seen the white rose on her welcome mat after that, soil on the terracotta rim and a shell tied to the stem. Those incidents had felt like warnings. Tonight the warning had become theft. She stepped outside barefoot, and the gravel was cold under her soles. The hedge stood as a low line between her property and the neighboring house. Moonlight drew a pale rim across the leaves. A shadow moved on the path beyond the hedge. Elena crouched and reached for the low gate latch, slow so she would not show fear. Her breath came steady. Suspicion pushed her forward, and the weight of grief made her press Alexander. She called, using his name before she had proof. Her voice carried. A figure stopped and shifted his coat. He came toward the hedge with the careful walk she had seen before, hands in pockets, shoulders measured. He set something on the far side of the low plant line, a navy folder, damp along one edge. Elena's fingers tightened on the gatewood. He pressed his palm flat on the hedge, close enough that she could smell cedar and saltellina, Alexander Vale. And his baritone fell across the small yard. He left this for you. She pulled the folder through the gap and opened it with light hands. The photograph inside was blurred at the edges, but not its subject, her husband's face, younger, with someone standing beside him whose jaw she recognized with a shock she had not expected. The face was not one she knew at first sight. Her stomach folded. Why is this here? Elena. Her hands were steady, but she refused to let them show the trimmer. The word contained accusation and demand. Alexander did not answer at once. He smoothed the coat. He wore navy cashmere overcoat. The signature that had become part of the house across the hedge, and rested his thumb against a signet ringy, should have told you sooner. He said he found a copy, and I wanted you to have it back. Marcus Hale's light came on down the lane. He had been watching from his front porch. He crossed the path with a lantern already light. Everything all right. Elena. Marcus, as he reached the low hedge, voice sharp with neighborly concern. Oh, Elena, someone took papers from my desk. Marcus looked at Alexander and then at the folder. He cleared his throat. I've seen footsteps along the sand track, he said 2 nights ago. I caught a glimpse near the old boardwalk. Suspicion shifted to anger in Elena's chest. She stepped back through her gate and slammed it shut with a sound meant to close off uncertainty. She paced 3 steps toward the house, and then stopped, thinking fast. The photograph sat folded against her palm. She ran the corner of a thumbnail along the image, until the blur settled into a detail, a cufflink with an engraved cross that matched a set her husband had once shown her. The image reframed the past in a single motion. Her grief, practical and raw, turned into an urgent need for answers. Morning found Elena at her kitchen table with the folder opened fully, a small lamp turned low despite the dawn light. The photograph lay in the center of the papers. Papers that had been scattered showed evidence of a search. She read a note she'd never noticed before, a penciled line on the back of an invoice. C. Vale account cleared. She looked up as Alexander arrived at her gate. Not through the hedge this time, but on the front path with a respectful distance. Alexander. Elena. And the name was steady. Explain this. He did not approach the kitchen table. He remained on her porch step, hands folded in front of him. Elena, I bought the house next door to be near you. He said he wanted to watch over the place you, and he built. His voice was measured. It gave her protection without the suddenness of affection to watch over. "Elena repeated, you entered my house. You left the folder, but you took it first. Who are you protecting me from?" "From those who would erase him. Alexander, from people connected to his companies who moved after his death." Detective Larkin arrived that afternoon with a tidy briefcase and an official posture that made Elena feel less alone. He set papers on her coffee table and spread them like a diagnosis. There have been transfers tied to the property purchase. Larkin, tapping a ledger, unusual wiring through shell corporations. Elena read the lines under his finger. Numbers moved in a column, accounts opening and closing around dates. She recognized the closing of her husband's affairs, the weeks after the funeral. She looked at Alexander. He watched the detective's face, and then at the ledger with a flush that was hard to pass. You wanted to protect me," she said. Detective Larkin wants to know whether that protection is lawful, or part of something else. An emotion shift moved through Elena, suspicion to incredulity. She had imagined him a quiet neighbor. Now she saw evidence of corporate tendrils and questions that might take more than his patience to untangle. Her mouth tightened. "If this is about the estate," she said. "Say so clearly." He did not give a clear answer. Instead, Alexander offered partial admission under the afternoon glare as they walked the narrow walkway that separated the properties. "He bought the house because I thought I could keep an eye on certain documents linked to your husband's firm. He said there is a codicil. I thought I could find it before others did." Elena stopped and turned in the path. "A codicil," she said. "Then why not tell me you were looking for it? Why not ask me?" A flash of anger came up in her voice. She his name sharply, 3 times in quick succession. "Alexander, why would you hide something like that?" He matched her sharpness with a flat honesty. "Because I thought secrecy would keep you safe." She laughed without humor. "You chose secrecy over my trust." They traded 3 more short lines, rapid and clipped. "Alexander, did you pay anyone to move things?" Elena demanded. "Did you ask Rosa anything?" "No," he said. "He delivered nothing to her." "Then who did you meet at the market?" She shot back, remembering the housekeeper's words. He did not answer before Marcus' lantern bobbed in the lane again. Marcus had news. Rosa, the housekeeper, came to the door with a face that looked like a warning. "Belly saw him at the market," she said. Vale met with Evelyn Cross." He handed an envelope. Elena felt her chest narrow. Evelyn Cross was a name that shifted the shape of the threat. A corporate executive with fingers in property and finance. She had heard the name in hushed tones at fundraisers, not in the context of her own house. Evelyn Cross. Elena repeated. "What did she have to do with my husband's estate?" Rosa shrugged and fished a glove from her apron pocket, as if to steady herself. She had the look of someone used to getting what she wanted. Rosash smiled and left with the envelope. That afternoon the investigation sharpened into an accusation aimed at a person who had legal muscle and no public tenderness. Elena pressed a palm to the photograph again and found that the cuff-link detail matched a ledger scrap Detective Larkin had flagged. The evidence began to point in a single direction. Someone close to corporate decisions had been involved in moving assets after her husband's death. The day closed into storm time. Wind came up off the ocean with a raw tang. At twilight, rain began in vertical sheets that hit the driveway and threw small white spears of spray between the houses. The air tightened with urgency. Evelyn Cross arrived in a black car at the end of the drive and moved with a purposeful gait under an umbrella. She carried a legal-looking folder and stepped toward Elena's front gate without hesitation. Alexander intercepted her at the driveway with both hands spread as if to block a physical passively. "You can't serve papers like that at night," he said. He moved like someone who had practiced this precise interruption in the mirror. Evelyn smiled with teeth that did not reach her eyes. "Vale," she said, "you need to understand the paperwork is in order." She lifted the folder. "These are legal papers." Detective Larkin arrived and took the folder from Evelyn's hand with the kind of official touch that claimed evidence these are service documents. Larkinwell processed them properly. Elena stepped out onto the porch with no umbrella and let the rain wet the hem of her dress. The rain made small pinpricks of cold on her skin. She felt the sudden shift from suspicion to danger. The legal threat felt like a hand on the throat of her house. "What are these papers?" she demanded. Evelyn's smile narrowed. "There is a codicil to Mr. Marlowe's will," she said. "It changes the distribution of assets. It names a corporate trustee and requires review." Eleanor's jaw worked. She read the language of power in Evelyn's voice, the grammar of corporation and control. Elena, who found it. Evelyn did not answer directly. Alexander stepped forward and spoke with an urgency that edged into pleading. "Jelena, I found fragments of documents linked to that codicil. I traced transactions." I thought he searched for the right words in the stormlight. He thought if I could get proof, we could stop an unfair transfer. Elena felt a new emotion shift. Doubt edged into wary hope. The pieces fit in a way that made sense. The man who had come to watch her had also pursued paper trails in the weeks after her husband's death. But she remembered secrecy and the broken drawer. She remembered a dark shape at the hedge and a white rose on her mat. Trust would not arrive with a single set of proof. Evelyn's lawyerly tone hardened. She set the folder down on the hood of her car with a wet thud. "Vale, you are not authorized to interfere with legal processes. This is a matter for the court." They traded 3 rapid lines, and the argument stung like cold rain. Elena, Evelyn, who benefits from this codicil? Evelyn, a trustee controlled by corporate partners. Alexander, not if we can prove it, was all to Detective Larkin. Prove it in a court. Then the volley left a ring of purpose in the group. Each person now had a role to play. Inside the house later, Elena spread the documents on her table again. The codicil language was dense. But Detective Larkin had marked a line that suggested a hidden amendment, an unsigned clause that could invalidate the transfer if proven forged. Elena's hands hovered over the passage. She felt a clear decision bracing her. She could hand everything to Larkin and leave it to the law. Or she could accept Alexander's help and pursue proof beyond courtroom filings. She remembered the photograph and the cuff link. She remembered the white rose and the rock on the welcome mat. She thought of Marcus watching from his porch and Rosa's market sighting. Each person had become a node of information that drew together into a single lattice. A new plan formed: combine Alexander's resources, Detective Larkin's authority, and Marcus' neighborhood vigilance to trace Evelyn's network of transfers. They moved that night in small, concrete steps. Alexander placed a ledger on Elena's table, a slim book with rows of dates, and a neat script. "He found this at a market stall records office after I met Evelyn. He said it lists payments to shell accounts tied to your husband's estate." Elena opened the ledger. Inside, a familiar handwriting annotated dates matching invoices that Larkin had already flagged. Elena ran a fingertip along a line that connected a transfer 3 weeks after the funeral to a company name she had never seen before, Crossfield Holdings. Rosa came in the next morning with a grocery bag and an important piece of information. She had stopped a courier at the seaside market who had been asked to carry an envelope to a small executive in town. It was for Evelyn Cross. Rosa reported looked nervous. He didn't know what was in it. Detective Larkin arranged for a subpoena. Marcus offered his boat as a vantage point for watching the supply path to the market. Alexander arranged for a private forensic review of paper fibers in the codicil fragments. Each action moved suspicion toward evidence. Elena found herself acting in ways she had not since her husband's death. She made lists, checked times, and left notes in plain sight for neighbors to follow. There was a sudden twist 2 days later. The market courier called Elena from an anonymous number and said he had kept a receipt for an envelope. The receipt named a financial manager with a private mailbox. The courier's voice trembled. He said, "I shouldn't have taken it, Ms. Marlowe. They meet to bring it to the cafe by the pier at noon. I left early. I still have the receipt. That call reframed the earlier events. The anonymous courier's fear became a concrete lead. Alina felt a surge of something like control. She arranged to meet him at the pier and took the receipt with her. The pier had gulls that screamed and a damp smell of tar. The courier handed over a small paper slip with a stamp from Crossfield Holdings. Elena photographed it with a steady hand and sent the image to Detective Larkin. Larkin responded, "We can subpoena the mailbox. We can trace the manager." "This is good." His tone had a clipped optimism that Elena took as permission to act. They planned a confrontation at the seaside market on a late afternoon when Evelyn's pattern suggested she might appear. Marcus watched from across a covered stall. Rosa kept an eye on the shoreline. Alina stayed inside until Alexander signaled with a small hand motion from the hedge. Then she stepped out. Evelyn arrived in a different posture, that day less public, more watchful. Alexander moved close and interrupted a business-like conversation Evelyn had with a slim corporate associate. The associate argued briefly in a clipped exchange while Alexander stepped between them and passed a note. The associate's face turned a color Alina had seen before, guilt. Evelyn's associate tried to step around Alexander. The exchange snapped into rapid lines. "Alina, Evelyn, stop. This is my home and my husband's name Alexander. Evelyn, answer me. Did you authorize transfers?" The associate said I don't. Evelyn cut him off and said, "You cannot threaten me here, Mr. Vale. Alexander, I'm not threatening you. I'm asking for the truth." The quick volley ended with the associate leaving in a flurry. Evelyn drew herself up and folded an umbrella, the gesture precise and controlled. "Ms. Marlowe, legal documents will decide this. I do not negotiate in public." Her voice had that finality of boardrooms. Alina stepped forward and said plainly, "Then bring them to a public hearing. I will be there." The market crowd thinned. Evelyn's smile did not change, but her eyes hardened. The day moved into a wash of salt and paper and the faint smell of rain. In that moment Alina recognized a new feeling, a calibrated courage that came from assembling people and proof. The shift in her own emotions moved from trembling suspicion to purposeful resolve. The confrontation at the driveway during the storm had been the chapter's peak. It forced Evelyn into a public posture and compelled Detective Larkin to act. He filed for emergency preservation of documents and arranged for Crossfield's mailbox to be inspected. For the first time since her husband's death, Alina watched legal processes click into motion like gears she could see and touch. When paperwork arrived that evening sealed, heavy with court stamps, Alina opened it at her kitchen table. The codicil fragment Detective Larkin had flagged matched handwriting samples Alexander's team had uncovered. The forensic report showed paper fibers inconsistent with the stationery at the time the will was written. The numbers aligned with Crossfield transfers. The court issued a temporary injunction to freeze the questioned accounts. Alina read the words on the legal sheet and felt something practical open in her chest instead of the raw hole of grief. Evidence had changed the shape of danger into something treatable. She looked up at Alexander, who stood by the window with the stormlight painting his jaw in a wet rim. He did not move toward her immediately. He simply held the ledger she had been carrying to the table that morning. "What happens now?" "Eleanor, we show the court the ledger and the receipts." Detective Larkin from behind his cup of coffeino. "We make a case they worked through the night." Marcus brought statements from the neighbors. Rosa provided the courier's name and gave a signed note about the envelope she had seen. Alexander coordinated a list of payments. Evelyn's legal team pushed back with procedural motions, but the injunction stayed. The argument moved from pathos to procedure. Proof mattered now more than posture. After the court action, Alina sat at her study desk and reread the photograph again. She had traced the cuff link to a moment in her husband's file where he had met with a consultant whose card had a Crossfield logo. The photograph had reframed the past into an actionable lead. Alina folded the photograph and slid it into the navy folder Alexander had returned at midnight. The folder felt like a small, heavy thing, proof and memory bound together. That night Alexander came to her study window and did not hide in the hedge. He stood at the walkway and watched the waves throw themselves at the shore with a hard rhythm. He raised a hand in a simple, human gesture and then walked up to the porcelana. He said, "I'm sorry for taking your privacy. I was wrong to enter the house." She met him at the top step. The rain had stopped and the air smelled of seaweed and clean stone. Elena held the navy folder between them like a shared weight. "You were wrong," she said. Voice flat with the memory of the forced drawer, "but you found what we needed." He put his hand flat on the folder where her fingers rested. His thumb brushed the edge of the photography. "Did it because I wanted justice for him," he said, "and because I could not bear to let you face this alone." They spoke in short lines then, a set of 3 or 4 exchanges that felt like negotiations. "Alexander, can I trust you?" she asked. "Can I let you in?" He answered, "I will be transparent. I will sign anything you want. I will let the law run its course." His name, Alexander, "if you are lying." And he finished, "I will accept the consequence." There was no grand confession of love that night. There was an offer, shared purpose. Elena felt the last emotion shift of the chapter, wary hope settle into cautious collaboration. She decided to test that offer with action rather than words. She placed the navy folder on his palm and said, "Then help me make them pay attention. Help me see this through to court." He nodded. His thumb rested against his signet ring once, the small habitual motion that had appeared during quieter moments. He will. "Alexander and Elena, I'll step back when you ask me to." Elena smiled with a small, guarded movement that felt like the first time she had allowed someone other than grief to enter the house. She took a step inside and, as she passed the window, saw Alexander stand at the walk. He did not follow. He let the porch light be a mark of distance and presence at once. Dawn came with glassy light and gulls complaining beyond the bluff. On her windows lay 2 small things, a ledger Ellie had not noticed in the dark, and a single seashell tied with twine. A note lay beside them, unsent and simple, "I will pursue this publicly." Elena picked up the ledger and felt the heft of names and dates. She opened to the last page and saw a scrawled line that connected Crossfield to a trusty address. She put the ledger in a bag and walked to Alexander's door at dawn. Her hands did not tremble now. She lifted her knuckles and knocked. The knock landed as a clear, deliberate sound against the door. Elena waited with the ledger in her other hand and the seashell in her pocket, ready to take the next step that would turn a private theft into public truth.